Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and this is my card for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. And I had it saved on my phone so I could look at the colors, and I decided this time to pull out another one of the Simon Says Stamp Susie's In Full Bloom, the pre-printed watercolor panels that I've just been loving. So I pulled one of those out, and I decided this time to use my Peerless watercolors with them. And if you're not familiar with Peerless watercolors, they're basically like a dried, I think it's dye-based pigment, and they're on little paper backing sheets. I've done multiple videos over the years using them, but I have just this this is just the basic pack. I have all the colors, but I just have the basic pack here, and I just have pieces of it taped to some watercolor paper. And then all you do is you can pick up the color with either a wet paintbrush or a water brush like I'm doing here. Or you can actually cut off little pieces and suspend them like right into water, and it will dissolve into the water, and you can watercolor with it that way. But my favorite way is just using a water brush. So all I'm doing is picking up the color with a water brush and painting it right onto the flowers here. Really, really simple, really easy. This is one of my favorite methods of watercoloring for ease of use, I guess. I highly recommend them, and you can get this basic pack for its around $15, maybe even a little less than that. And I've had mine for years, like years and years and years, and I've been using these little just pieces for the longest time. So all I was doing was picking up the color and then painting it onto the petals, and then I went back as it was drying and just added another layer just to give it a little bit more depth, and then would go on to the next section. And the thing I really love about these, like the Susie's pre-printed panels, is so many of them they're so large. So it gives you kind of a chance to color and experiment and play around a little bit. You know, they're not tiny little detailed images. So I can kind of go back and forth. And by the time I'm done one, area, and finish the next, I can go back and start coloring in the next. And I'm not really worried about things drying because they're already dry in between. So I did all of the petals first with just that one shade of yellow, and then I went into the centers and I just mixed the brown and then the kind of reddish brown sort of a color, and just kind of kept it all to one side, and then started kind of dotting my little water brush there, just give it a little bit of texture. So really simple. And then I went in and did the stems and the leaves with this green. Decided to add yellow to that. I don't know if that bud, I would assume the bud would be more of a green than yellow, but I just liked how it looked with the yellow. So did that, and then went in and did the exact same thing. And with a lot of this, I would wet the area first with my brush and then pull in the Peerless. However, I find that these blend really nicely and they move really easily. Even on, like, these are pre-print onto distressed watercolor paper, which sometimes I have difficulties with, just depending on what I'm using. It's just a different type of watercolor paper if you're at all familiar with other brands or anything like that. But I find if I wet areas first with this and then apply whatever color I'm using, it works the best. But like I said, with Peerless, it's just easy to use. So I just kept picking up the color with my water brush and then just painting it onto the area and then deepening some areas. And then I let that dry, and I decided to die cut a second piece of just the distressed watercolor paper with the smooth side facing up. And I grabbed my Distress Oxide ink in Broken China, which is my absolute favorite so far. I reach for this one all the time. This is one color that I know I'm going to get a ton of use out of. So I grabbed that and my little ink blending tool and just started sponging the ink on, starting in kind of the lower right-hand corner. In my head, my plan was to trim out those flowers and adhere them over top of this. And I had the plan to cut off some of the edges. So I started the ink where I plan on layering the flowers. So blended that all out, and then trimmed the flowers out off camera because it's just easier. It didn't take too long, and then I actually used my craft knife again on the center areas. Still struggle with the craft knife, but I made it work. I wanted all the little interior parts cut out because I just like how that looks. So did all that trimming and cut out the interior areas, and then decided to add a little bit more ink to this background. And once I was happy with that, got everything out of the way, especially those Peerless, because you don't want to get those wet because you're just going to have a huge mess in your hands. And then I sprayed my distress sprayer into my hand and then would pick it up with my fingers and then just flicked it onto the paper here. I've been experimenting more with just trying different ways to achieve like a splatter effect. So I kind of like this one, but did that once, let it sit for probably close to a minute to get the reaction. And then that wasn't enough for me, so I sprayed it directly with the sprayer. And this time I didn't let it sit as long, because one, I was being impatient, and two, I was just curious. So didn't let it sit as long, and you get a lighter reaction, like it doesn't turn as white when you pull up the water with the paper towel. So I was happy with that though. So I did all that, and then I had die cut the word wishing from the Simon Says stamp wishing die 3 times from some white cardstock. And I'm just using my little Tim Holtz magnetic tray. I've had that sitting by my Big Shot, and a lot of times I've been putting like little die cuts like this, and just whatever I'm die cutting multiples of, I stick it in the tray so that I don't end up losing all the little pieces. So I die cut that 3 times, and I'm going to stack them together with my Tonic Nouveau adhesive. Lots of people ask me about this. Do I prefer this over Ranger's Multi-Medium Matte? Honestly, I really do like this adhesive. I find it's a little bit easier to use than the Multi-Medium Matte. You do have to be a little carefuler with this one though, because it's a little more liquidy. It tends to go everywhere. Whereas the Multi-Medium Matte is definitely a thicker adhesive, and it kind of stays put, if that makes sense, and easier to apply a thinner amount. It's very hard to show on camera, but I am not squeezing the bottle at all, like hardly at all, trying to apply as little adhesive as possible. It still oozes out the sides a bit, but I don't mind that. I just quickly wipe it away with my fingers. So to each their own. I'm not discounting my Multi-Medium Matte because it comes in handy for so many things, but I am loving the Nouveau adhesive. So I stacked that sentiment, and then I pulled out my mini Misties so that I could line up the background, the flowers, and the sentiment, because I want to stamp a coordinating sentiment with this little stamp from the Simon Says Sending and Wishing stamp set. So I kind of lined everything up on my Misty here, and lined up where I'm going to put the flowers and the sentiment, and then I put my clear acetate sheet over it that has the grid lines, and then held that all in place with my big magnet so that I could get this little stamped sentiment. I wanted to make sure I got this perfectly straight, perfectly lined up, because I'm going to stamp it directly onto this background, so I really didn't want to mess this up. However, if I did mess it up, my plan was to just stamp and heat emboss it on a piece of black cardstock, and I would adhere that over top and nobody would know. But got everything lined up, so then I removed everything but the background, and then stamped that sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. It stamped exactly where I wanted it to. This is why I just love my Misty. It has saved me so many times when it comes to making cards. So I was happy with everything, so now I can adhere these flowers, and I'm just using that same adhesive and only applying the adhesive onto the one side here, because this other side is going to hang off the edge. And not applying tons of adhesive, just enough to hold everything into place. And it gives me a few seconds to kind of wiggle things into place where I want these flowers to be. And then I can press down and they're good to go. So got that all adhered, and then I did the same thing with the die cut sentiment, and just applying the adhesive to the widest areas. It doesn't need to be completely covered. With liquid adhesives, less is more. You just need enough to hold everything in place. It doesn't need every little tiny bit covered, and also that minimizes you don't want adhesive oozing out. This also, I should mention, this doesn't dry as matte as the Multi-Medium Matte adhesive. It does dry clear, but it's not as invisible as Multi-Medium Matte is. I find Multi-Medium Matte, if it does ooze out at all, or if there's just a spot where it's visible, you barely can see it. Whereas this, you can see a little bit more. So I think they each have their own place. I have no plans on getting rid of or only sticking to one of these adhesives. I like them both. So I adhere down the sentiment, and then my card base is heavyweight white cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 11, and then I scored it at 5 1/2 with my Teflon bone folder. And before I get to anything else, I'm going to stamp the inside of the card. So I have a sentiment from the Simon Says, this is the big Scripty Greetings stamp set. So lined that up in my Misty again, and decided to ink this up with that same Broken China Distress Oxide ink. I really like these inks for stamping too. I've been raving about them every time I use them in a video, but I just love them. So I only had to ink it up the once, did not need to re-stamp it. So stamp that, and then I'm going to adhere my card front here to the card base itself. And same thing, just using this Nouveau adhesive, and not applying too much, because like all liquid adhesives, if you apply it way too thick, you're going to warp. The cardstock is going to warp as the moisture as it dries, and it's going to get all bent and just a mess. So just a thin amount is good. So I adhered that into place, and then I flipped open the card, and I'm just going to trim off all these bits of the flower that are hanging over. If I was going to hand deliver this card, I would leave it as is. But if you want to put it in an envelope, unless you're going to put it in a larger envelope, you want to cut that off. So I didn't mind either way how it looked. So I just trimmed it off and then decided I had to add baker's twine. I'm obsessed with baker's twine again lately. Everything needs baker's twine. So I wrapped some black and white baker's twine around the top of the front of the card here. And I'm going to hold it in place for a second with my fingers. And then I just use my reverse tweezers to hold that in the knot in place, or the tie knot, whatever you call it. Hold it in place so I can fiddle back and forth a bit here to get the bow the way I want it. Especially with baker's twine, because it's twisted, it likes to kind of flop around and do its own things. So that's why I love those reverse tweezers, to hold that in place until I'm ready to pull everything tight. So I did some more fiddling, and then I was like, you know what, this would look kind of cute if I lowered it a little bit. And thankfully I hadn't put any adhesive really on the very tips of that flower there. So I'm able to kind of move this knot around and pull it down a little bit further and just kind of pull it in behind the ends of the petals there. I just thought that would look the best. And then of course I like leaving the tails of my baker's twine like as long as possible. I just like the look of it. So trimmed off the excess there, and was going to be done there, but I couldn't resist. I pulled out my Studio Katja sparkling clear, like rhinestones basically, and liberally applied these to my card front. I just love the look of them, especially with any sort of floral image, because they kind of, you know, they almost look like raindrops. So sprinkled them kind of here and there onto the card front here, and then I'm just picking them up with my crystal katana and then using little tiny dabs of this same Nouveau adhesive and then pressing it into place. And then I'm going to let everything dry, and that finished off my card. So as always, I will have links to all the supplies in the description box below the video, as well as over on my blog, and a link to the color challenge if you guys would like to play along. So check out my blog post for all of that info. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.